I had just finished grilling steaks in the backyard when two uniformed officers walked through the side gate without so much as a knock, their flashlights cutting across the lawn as if they already knew where I was sitting. They asked for me by full name, not the casual Danny everyone calls me, and before my wife could even ask what was happening, they handed me a printed notice with the county seal across the top. According to the paper, I was under investigation for financial fraud tied to my family's construction company, Cruz Contracting, and all my personal accounts were being frozen pending review. My first reaction was to laugh, because the idea of me laundering money was as absurd as my mother giving up her morning prayers. But the younger officer looked me straight in the eye and told me the paperwork wasn't a mistake. Behind me, the sound of sizzling meat suddenly felt eerie, like something finishing itself on the fire while the rest of my life collapsed around it. My wife, Maya, snatched the paper out of my hand before I could process the details and demanded to know what evidence they had. The officers only repeated that a judge had signed the order, which meant they were past the point of speculation. My 10-year-old son was inside playing video games, and the thought of him overhearing this made my stomach clench harder than anything I'd ever lifted on a worksite. I asked how they got my name, and the older officer flipped through his folder until he produced a notarized resignation letter and a series of suspicious wire transfers made from accounts under my login. There, stamped and sealed, was a document stating that I had willingly stepped down from Cruz Contracting 2 weeks ago, transferring authority to my younger brother Leo, and granting my mother Teresa full financial control during the transition. My supposed signature sat at the bottom of the page, twisted just enough to almost pass as mine, and beneath it was the stamp of a notary I knew personally, someone who had eaten at our dinner table. The officers left after reminding me not to leave the county until the review was complete, and once the gate clanged shut behind them, I turned to see Leo standing in the doorway of the house, as if he had been waiting for this moment. He wore that same crooked grin he used when we were kids, and he'd gotten away with something before I noticed. "It's not what you think, Danny," he said, stepping down into the yard. Maya rounded on him immediately, her voice sharp and trembling, asking how my name had ended up on legal papers I had never touched. Leo raised his hands like he was calming a dog, claiming that Mom had only done what was necessary to protect the company when irregularities showed up in the books. According to him, vendors were calling about unpaid invoices and checks were bouncing, and Mom had panicked that I was too distracted or careless to manage things properly. He said she pushed through emergency paperwork, using Lucia, our family's longtime notary, to legitimize it. His tone was calm, almost rehearsed, and the casual way he admitted to rewriting my life made my blood boil. "You're telling me Mom forged my name," I said, forcing the words out as evenly as I could, though I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Leo shook his head and said, "No, I'm saying she saved the business before you got us all dragged under. You've been spread too thin, Danny, and you know it." I stepped closer, holding the forged letter in front of his face. "You and Mom had no right," I told him. "And if you think I'm going to sit here while you two paint me as some criminal, you don't know me at all." His smirk faltered just enough to confirm what I already feared. He had been expecting this confrontation and had chosen his lies long before tonight. Maya backed me up, telling Leo he was insane if he thought anyone would believe I would willingly walk away from the business I had spent every waking hour keeping alive since Dad's death. But Leo only looked at her with thin patience and said, "Maya, this isn't personal. You know I care about Danny, but you also know his way of doing things has been sloppy. You've seen the late nights, the forgotten invoices, the jobs underbid just so he could say yes to everyone. Someone had to step in, and Mom trusted me to keep the ship afloat." His words stung not because they were true, but because they were half-true, twisted versions of flaws I'd been trying to work on. I didn't sleep that night. I drove down to the yard around midnight, needing to see the place with my own eyes, to reassure myself that it was still mine. But when I pulled up, the security gate refused my key card. A new guard, someone I had never hired, stepped out of a booth and asked me to leave. When I told him who I was, he flipped through his clipboard and told me I wasn't authorized to be on site anymore. Through the chain-link fence, I could see trucks being moved and files carried into the office, even at that hour. It felt like watching a surgery being performed on a body I was still inside of. I drove back home in silence, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Maya sat up waiting for me, and when I walked in, she asked what I had found. I told her the truth, that I had been locked out of my own company and that my brother and mother were treating me like an intruder. She sat beside me at the kitchen table, her hand covering mine, and she asked the question I had been trying not to face. Do you think they planned this together? I wanted to say no. I wanted to cling to the idea that family might wound each other by accident, but would never conspire. Yet the forged signature, the notary's stamp, the ready paperwork, and the new security guard told a different story. Yeah, I whispered, the word tasting like ash. They planned it. The morning after the officers crashed my backyard, I found myself in a stiff-back chair at the downtown bank, staring across at a manager who had the look of a man who thought politeness could hide a knife. He scrolled through my accounts while Maya sat beside me, one hand pressed firmly on my knee as though she feared I would stand up and shout. When he finally looked up, he told me my personal and business accounts were under hold pending an investigation into suspicious transfers. He would not comment on specifics, but when I pressed, he admitted the flagged recipient was a vendor named Blue Coast Materials, LLC, with payments totaling nearly $250,000. Every transfer had been approved from my login on my company's Wi-Fi. I felt the words strike me like a hammer. I told him flatly that I had never heard of Blue Coast and never signed off on those wires. His reply was calm, almost mechanical. Mr. Cruz, the approvals are in your name. I can only advise you to seek legal counsel. Maya squeezed my knee tighter. I knew then that no one in that room saw me as innocent. Leaving the bank, humiliation clung to me like smoke. I bought a coffee just to steady my hands, but when my card declined in front of a barista and 3 strangers, I nearly lost control. That sting of public embarrassment was worse than anger. It was the first crack in the shell I'd built around myself as a man who kept his world together. Maya led me out, whispering, "This isn't the place to fight, Danny." But I couldn't shake the thought that someone, maybe my own blood, had put me exactly in that spot on purpose. We drove straight to Lucia's small stucco house behind the grocery store. She was the notary whose stamp had been on my forged resignation letter, and when she answered the door in her floral robe, her hands trembled against the frame. I showed her the papers and asked why my name was there. She claimed Mom had brought her the documents during the Memorial Weekend for my father, said it was estate cleanup, and that she trusted Teresa after 20 years of family friendship. She admitted she hadn't watched me sign, but assumed my signature on one sheet meant the others were mine. Maya stepped forward, fury in her voice, and told Lucia that notarizing wasn't a favor you do for tamales and raffle tickets. Lucia's pride stiffened. She said she had only acted in good faith, then asked if Teresa knew we were here because she didn't want to be in the middle. The way she said it confirmed what I already suspected. She knew she had crossed a line and didn't want my mother angry with her. I left her doorstep shaking, my apology caught in my throat, and drove to the yard. I needed to see my place with my own eyes. But when I rolled up, the new security guard stepped from the booth and told me politely that I wasn't on the approved list anymore. A notice taped inside the window carried a court docket number and the words, "Workplace Protective Order." As if to drive the insult deeper, a patrol car slid up behind me, lights off but ready, and the officer told me I was free to contest the order in court, but that stepping inside would mean a trespass charge. Maya's hand pressed into my back and she whispered, "Don't give them the story they want." I nodded, but my eyes locked on the shadow of the bay doors, the same ones where Dad had once taught me to back a trailer straight without touching the bollards. That shadow felt like it had already forgotten me. It was Jorge, one of our most loyal foremen, who gave me the first crack of light. He texted me a delivery slip signed with my forged name for materials that had never reached their site. The vendor listed was Blue Coast, with a P.O. box at Mariners Plaza. My gut clenched because Mariners Plaza is where Leo's girlfriend Tiff works at a private mailbox shop. When I called Jorge, he lowered his voice and told me Leo had gathered the crews and said I'd been caught moving materials off book to cover losses, that the bank was sorting it out, and that the best thing for everyone was to stay quiet. "I don't believe him," Jorge said, "but some of the guys just need their paychecks." I told him not to push back. I wouldn't let him risk his job for me, not yet. Still, when I stared at the photo of my forged signature on the slip, I realized my brother wasn't just framing me. He was actively running a scheme in my name. That afternoon, I drove to Mariners Plaza and walked into the mailbox shop. The young clerk asked if I needed shipping or notary services, but I asked if Suite 214B belonged to Blue Coast. She stiffened and said she couldn't disclose client information. I was about to press further when Tiff came out from the back with packages. The moment she saw me, her smile vanished. "Danny, you shouldn't be here." she said quickly. I asked her if Leo was using a box here, and she looked over her shoulder before whispering, "Don't drag me into this. Teresa told me it's better this way. It's only temporary." She realized too late what she'd admitted. I thanked her and walked out before she could see my hands trembling. My suspicions were no longer guesses. They were confirmed truths. By the time we got home, I had rehearsed a dozen speeches to deliver to my mother, demanding answers, maybe even begging for some thread of explanation that would untangle the mess. But before I could, 2 unmarked sedans rolled up outside. Investigators stepped into our kitchen with a search warrant for my laptop, my phone, and any devices tied to the company accounts. They moved with the careful efficiency of men used to walking into people's lives and bagging their hope in plastic bins. My son stood in the hallway holding his stuffed bear and asked Maya if the police were taking Daddy to jail. She crouched, told him they were just borrowing my computer, then closed his door and leaned against it with her forehead pressed to the wood. One of the investigators, a man with faded tattoos of his children's names on his arm, told me family cases were the ones that twisted his stomach. I asked him for a copy of the IP logs, told him someone was using my name like a crowbar. He didn't promise, but he nodded. When they finally left, the silence was crushing. Maya set a glass of water in front of me and said, "We can spend tonight breaking, or we can spend it planning." I told her I didn't know who we included anymore, since my own mother had signed me out of my life and my brother was parading around in it. She held my gaze and said, "We means this house. Me, our son, and anyone still willing to hear your truth over their papers." Then my phone buzzed. An anonymous email had arrived with only one line. "Check the bylaws. Teresa kept more than you know." The anonymous email sat in my inbox like a live wire, humming louder the more I stared at it. "Check the bylaws. Teresa kept more than you know." It was unsigned, routed through a throwaway address that bounced back when I tried to reply, and vague enough to sound like either a warning or bait. Still, it clawed at me. For weeks I had been fighting shadows, documents with my name twisted into a weapon, whispers that turned into official papers, and a mother who had always preached family above all else, but now treated me like a disease. The word bylaws dragged me backward into memory. My father sitting at the kitchen table years ago with a binder, explaining to Leo and me how the company was structured, what rights each of us had, and how votes were supposed to be counted. Back then I barely listened. I assumed Dad would always be the one keeping score. But the binder still existed. I hadn't thought about it since the funeral. That night, after Maya put our son to bed, I dug through the garage until I found the old fireproof lockbox where Dad kept birth certificates and company papers. Inside, under brittle tax returns, was the thick black binder labeled Cruz Contracting Bylaws. Dust clung to the cover like it had been waiting for me. I flipped it open on the workbench, scanning through articles about ownership shares and voting rights. Halfway down a page, my heart stumbled. According to the bylaws, Dad had written in a clause granting his majority share not to my mother or brother, but to me as the eldest son, provided I was active in the business. He'd even initialed it with his uneven pen stroke. That meant no matter what emergency resolution Mom and Leo had filed, legally, I was still the controlling partner. The realization hit hard. Either they had ignored the bylaws, or worse, they had hidden them. But why? My father's initials made it clear he had wanted me in charge. I could almost hear him, coughing between sips of black coffee, telling me that being the oldest meant you carried weight whether you wanted it or not. My chest tightened as I thought of how easily my own mother had buried that truth. I knew then the email hadn't been bait. It had been a lifeline. I couldn't confront her yet. Not without proof. The binder was mine, but if the bank and courts had already been fed forged documents, I needed someone outside the family who could help me fight back. The next morning I called Jorge, the foreman who had sent me the delivery slip. He agreed to meet at a diner out by the highway where the waitresses know the regulars and don't ask too many questions. When he slid into the booth across from me, he kept his cap low and his eyes sharp. "Leo's been running his mouth," he said before I even asked. "He's telling the guys you cut deals with suppliers and skimmed. He's promising raises once he cleans up the mess." Some of them believe him. He stirred his coffee and leaned closer. "But I know you, Danny. You wouldn't risk the company like that. What do you need?" Hearing those words nearly broke me. Loyalty had become such a foreign thing these past weeks that it felt like water in the desert. I pulled out the binder, opened it to the inheritance clause, and showed him Dad's handwriting. "This changes everything," I said. "Leo and Mom are pretending I stepped down. But legally, I didn't. This proves they're lying. Jorge studied the page, whistled low, and shook his head. If that's true, you've got leverage. But you can't wave this around yet. You need a lawyer who knows corporate law, not just some public defender. He slid me a napkin with a name and number scrawled on it. A buddy of mine used her when a partner tried to freeze him out of a trucking business. She's tough, doesn't scare easy. That's how I met Elena Morales. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of directness that cuts through excuses. When I handed her the forged resignation and then the binder with Dad's clause, she raised an eyebrow and said, "Your family either got sloppy or arrogant. Either way, this is ammunition. But before we fire it, I need to know everything. Every transfer, every vendor, every conversation." For 3 hours I spilled everything. Blue Coast, the mailbox at Mariners Plaza, the protective order, the notary stamp, even the investigator with tattooed arms who had searched my house. She didn't flinch. "Your brother and mother have created a narrative that you're incompetent or corrupt. That's what the bank and cops see. To break it, we don't just show your father's intent. We prove their active fraud." I asked how. She leaned forward, tapping her pen. "Start with Blue Coast. Shell companies always leave fingerprints. APO box. That's lazy. If we can tie payments from Cruz contracting directly to your brother or his girlfriend, the story flips. Instead of you being careless, it becomes them stealing under your name. And once that cracks, the forged resignation collapses too." Her confidence steadied me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't drowning alone. That evening, when Maya asked how it went, I told her Elena believed me. She sat down across the table, relief softening her face, but then her eyes sharpened again. "Danny, you have to be careful. If Mom finds out you have those bylaws, she'll do whatever it takes to bury them again. Don't underestimate her." I knew she was right. Teresa Cruz was not just a worried widow fumbling with numbers. She had always been the sharpest mind in the family, the one Dad leaned on to keep suppliers honest and taxmen patient. If she had decided Leo was the future and I was expendable, she would not go down without a fight. The next morning, I received another anonymous message, this time slipped under my front door in a plain envelope. Inside was a photocopy of an invoice from Blue Coast with a handwritten note. "Ask who signed the delivery slips. Not all of them are forged." My pulse raced. Someone close to Leo was feeding me information. An ally hidden in the walls. I didn't know who yet. Jorge, maybe, or someone on the crew who had seen too much, but it meant I wasn't alone in this. The cracks in their story were starting to show. And if I pushed at the right angle, I could split the whole thing wide open. For the first time since the officers stepped into my backyard, I believed I had a chance. Elena moved quickly, filing for an injunction that landed us in a downtown courtroom where the walls felt too close and the judge too tired to hear one more family ripping itself apart. My mother sat across from me with Leo and a bank attorney who looked like he ironed his conscience with his tie. Elena laid out the forged resignation, the fake vendor, the protective order, then placed Dad's bylaws on the bench. The clause giving me majority control was clear, initialed in his shaky hand. But the bank's counsel argued that regardless of old paperwork, the company couldn't be tossed around during an investigation, and my mother spoke of protecting payrolls as though stabbing her son was an act of mercy. For a moment, I thought the judge believed her. Then the back doors opened. Tiff hurried in with a manila envelope clutched like it was burning her fingers. Elena announced her as our subpoenaed witness. The room shifted. Tiff laid out deposit slips, mailbox applications, and screenshots of Leo's instructions. Use Danny's approval tag, or it won't pass. She admitted Blue Coast was a shell, that Leo had routed money through her cousin's name, and that Teresa herself had told her this was temporary until I was out of the way. Leo tried to bluster, claiming context, but when Elena asked if any slips bore his real signature, Tiff pointed out too. The judge leaned back, frowning at last. Minutes later, the gavel came down. My authority restored under injunction, Blue Coast accounts frozen, protective orders restructured so I could return to the yard. It wasn't a victory parade, just the air returning after weeks underwater. Still, as I walked out, I felt for the first time like the ground might hold. I drove straight to the yard. The gate blinked green for my badge again, and men I'd known since I was a boy stood in cautious knots as Leo paced near the trucks, and my mother watched from the mezzanine. I climbed the stairs with Elena at my side and laid the order, the bylaws, and Tiff's evidence on the desk. "You used my name," I said, my voice steady. "And you called it mercy. Leo snapped back that I had forced his hand, that I chased perfection while jobs bled. Mom said a business wasn't a shrine to a dead man's wishes, and she had chosen the son who could bend numbers to survive. I told her survival built on theft wasn't survival, it was rot. I turned to the crews below, promising payroll by Friday and showing them the judge's seal. Relief rippled through them like air in a stifled room. Leo slammed the desk, shouting that I was a sanctimonious fool who would ruin everything. "You think a piece of paper makes you dad?" he barked. I met his eyes and answered, "No. It makes me the man he trusted when he put his name beside mine." My mother stepped forward, her voice low and hard. She admitted she had chosen wrong, not because Leo lacked brains, but because she had grown willing to justify anything so the door stayed open. For 1 second I thought she might soften, but instead she warned me the weight of leadership would crush me like it had crushed him. I told her the worst had already happened, not the forged papers, not the bank, but the night she taught my son to walk around his father like a problem. Silence followed, heavy as a dropped beam. Then Leo threw the storage cage keys onto the desk. Downstairs I pulled the first ledger and found a slip with his full, unhidden signature. The men saw it too. They didn't cheer. They only let out the kind of breath a crew holds when waiting for a wall to fall. In my hand the slip felt heavier than iron. My phone buzzed with a text from the block number. "Now finish it." The slip with Leo's signature stayed in my pocket all night, like a live ember. I couldn't sleep, pacing the house while Maya whispered through the bedroom door for me to come to bed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face at the kitchen table, the binder in front of him, his voice telling me that being the eldest meant carrying weight, not discarding it. Now the weight was back on my shoulders, but it was heavier because of who had tried to strip it away. By morning I knew the fight wasn't about paperwork anymore. The injunction gave me authority, the ledger gave me proof, but none of it meant a thing if the men who ran our trucks and swung our hammers no longer trusted me. So I called a full crew meeting. 50 men filed into the bay, some avoiding my eyes, others nodding in solidarity. At the front, Leo crossed his arms, defiant even after the court order, while my mother stood off to the side, stone-faced, her rosary wound around her fingers like armor. I laid the slip on the table. "That's Leo's signature," I said. "Not mine, not forged. His. $240,000 routed through a company that doesn't exist. That's what almost shut down your paychecks and put a target on my back." The room shifted uneasily. I saw recognition in their eyes. This was no longer rumor or loyalty tug of war. This was fact. Leo tried to interrupt, saying it was a stopgap, that he'd done what was necessary to keep them working, but the words rang hollow now that the lie was exposed. Jorge spoke up, his voice rough but steady. "Danny never missed payroll in 10 years. Not once. That counts more than anything else." A murmur of agreement rippled through the men. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt their weight tipping back toward me. My mother stepped forward then, her gaze sweeping over the crews before settling on me. "If you want the company back, take it. You've got your papers, your witnesses, your men. But know this, Daniel, numbers don't forgive. Your father was a good man, and it killed him. If it doesn't kill you, it will harden you, and one day your son will look at you the way you're looking at me now." Her words sliced deeper than Leo's betrayal ever could, because in them I heard both warning and confession, love twisted into something unrecognizable. I told her I would rather break carrying the truth than live bending under lies. The crews went quiet, waiting for what came next. Leo's pride wouldn't let him bow out gracefully. He stormed across the bay, shouting that I was throwing away everything he had built in the past months. "You think they'll follow you? You think they'll trust you after this mess? You're dreaming," he yelled. His voice cracked, and in that crack I finally heard the boy I grew up with, the one who always feared being second best. I didn't shout back. I only said, "Then walk away, Leo. Because if you stay, it'll be on my terms, and you'll answer for every dollar." His jaw clenched, his eyes glassed over, and then he turned and walked out, slamming the bay door behind him. My mother followed without a word, her rosary still clutched tight. When the echo faded, I looked at the men and told them simply, "We start again today. Same work, same pride, no lies." One by one, they nodded. Relief replaced doubt. It wasn't celebration, it was survival, but it was ours. Later, in the office, Maya pressed her forehead against mine and whispered, "It's over." But it didn't feel over. The injunction was temporary, the investigation ongoing, and my family fractured in ways that no court could mend. The ledger in my pocket was enough to clear me, but not enough to heal what had been broken. That night, after the yard was quiet, I sat alone at my father's desk. His mug was still there, chipped at the rim, lipstick from Mom's last visit fading but not gone. I thought about her warning, that numbers don't forgive, that weight crushes even the best men. Maybe she was right. Maybe stepping into Dad's shoes meant walking the same path to an early grave. But when I went home and tucked my son into bed, he looked up at me and said, "Did you fix it, Dad?" I told him yes. Not perfectly, not forever, but yes for today. He smiled and rolled over, trusting me completely. In that moment, I understood the truth my father had left me in those bylaws. Leadership isn't about control or numbers. It's about being the one people can believe in when everything else cracks. The next morning, I received one last anonymous email. The fight isn't over. They'll be back. No name, no trace. Maybe it was Tiff, maybe someone else watching from the shadows. Either way, I closed the laptop and stood taller. Let them come. I had already survived the worst kind of betrayal, the kind that wears your blood. Whatever came next, I was ready.